You've been trained to explain yourself your entire life. When you were a child, you had to explain why you wanted something. In school, you had to justify your answers. At work, you defend your decisions. In relationships, you constantly clarify your intentions. And every single time you explain yourself, you give away a piece of your power. Niccolò Machiavelli observed something that most people never realize. The moment you start explaining, you've already lost. You've already admitted that someone else's judgment matters more than your own. You've already positioned yourself as the defendant, not the authority. The most powerful people in history, kings, emperors, master strategists, they didn't explain. They didn't justify. They didn't defend. They simply acted. And their silence was their authority. Cesare Borgia, the man Machiavelli studied obsessively, once executed a governor in the town square. When questioned why, he said nothing. The silence was more terrifying than any explanation could be. It communicated, "I don't owe you understanding. I owe you results." In this video, I'm going to reveal why explanation destroys authority, what happens psychologically when you stop explaining, and Machiavelli's exact framework for building untouchable authority through strategic silence. This isn't about being rude or dismissive. This is about understanding that explanation is a hidden form of submission, and learning when silence is the ultimate power move. Let's begin. Machiavelli wrote The Prince in 1513 after being tortured, exiled, and stripped of his position in Florence. He was surrounded by rulers who explained themselves constantly, and they all fell. Then he observed Cesare Borgia, a man who answered to no one, who made decisions that seemed cruel, irrational, or extreme, and refused to justify them. And people feared him, respected him, followed him. Machiavelli realized something. The need to explain comes from insecurity. The refusal to explain comes from certainty. When you explain, you're saying, "I'm not sure if this was right, so let me convince you it was." When you don't explain, you're saying, "This was right." Your understanding is optional. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, "You don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to upset you." He was talking to himself, reminding himself that other people's need for explanation wasn't his responsibility. The strategies you're about to learn come from studying rulers who commanded empires, generals who led armies, and philosophers who influenced centuries, all of whom understood that authority and explanation are inversely related. The more you explain, the less authority you have. The less you explain, the more untouchable you become. Before we continue, if this perspective is shifting how you see power and authority, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. I post videos on Machiavellian strategy, Stoic philosophy, and the psychology of power every week. And leave a comment telling me, do you find yourself constantly explaining your decisions to people who don't even have the authority to judge them? I want to know if this pattern shows up in your life. Your insights in the comments help everyone in this community grow. Now, let's dive into why explanation destroys authority and what to do instead. Here's what happens psychologically when you explain yourself. First, you create a power hierarchy, and you place yourself at the bottom. The moment you explain, you've established that the other person has the right to judge your actions. You've made them the authority and yourself the subordinate. Think about it. When does a king explain himself to a peasant? Never. When does a general justify his strategy to a foot soldier? Never. When does a judge defend his verdict to the convicted? Never. Authority flows downward. Explanation flows upward. If you're explaining, you're looking up at someone, and they can feel it. Second, explanation reveals doubt. Machiavelli wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. When you explain, you're showing them what you really are. Uncertain, insecure, seeking validation. Confident people don't explain because they don't need consensus. They've already decided. Your agreement is irrelevant." Third, Explanation opens you to manipulation. The moment you start explaining, you've entered a negotiation. And in any negotiation, the person who cares least about the outcome has the most power. When you explain, you've revealed that you care what they think. Now they can withhold approval to control you. They can demand more explanations. They can move the goalpost. They can make you dance for their validation. You just gave them leverage over you. Here's the brutal truth Machiavelli understood. Most people don't actually want an explanation. They want to see if you'll give one. They're testing whether you're in control or whether they can control you. And the moment you start explaining, you've answered that question. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine you've decided to quit your job and start a business. You tell your family. Immediately, they start asking questions. Why would you leave a stable job? What if it fails? Have you thought this through? What's your backup plan? Now, you have two options. Option 1, you explain. You lay out your business plan, your financial projections, your risk assessment. You try to convince them it's a good idea. You seek their approval. What just happened? You positioned them as the board of directors of your life. You gave them veto power over your decision. And here's what's worse. No matter how good your explanation is, if they were skeptical before, they'll find holes in it. But what about this scenario? What if that doesn't work? You'll never satisfy them because their questions weren't about information. They were about control. Option 2, you don't explain. I've made my decision. I appreciate your concern, but this is the direction I'm moving. Silence. Now what happens? They might push back initially. But we just want to understand, and you hold the boundary. I understand, and I've thought it through carefully. I'm not going to break down my entire decision-making process. The conversation ends, and something shifts. They might not agree with your decision, but they respect that it's yours to make. You've established that you're the authority in your own life. Machiavelli observed this pattern with Cesare Borgia repeatedly. When Borgia made controversial decisions, executing former allies, breaking treaties, conquering neighboring territories, he rarely explained his reasoning. His advisors would sometimes ask, "My lord, why did you order this?" Borgia would often respond with a single line, "Because it serves my purpose." Not our purpose, not the greater good, my purpose, and the conversation would end. His people learned that questioning Borgia's decisions was pointless, not because he was a tyrant who punished questions, but because he simply wouldn't engage with them. The questions had nowhere to go. They died in the silence. And here's what's fascinating. In the absence of explanation, people started creating their own narratives about Borgia's brilliance. He must see something we don't see. This must be part of a larger strategy. He's thinking 3 moves ahead. Borgia became more respected, more feared, and more powerful, not despite his silence, but because of it. Fourth, explanation dilutes your power through overexposure. Every time you explain yourself, you're revealing your decision-making process. You're showing people how you think. And once people understand how you think, they can predict you. And once they can predict you, they can manipulate you. Machiavelli warned about this extensively. He said a prince must be like a fox and a lion, cunning and strong, but also mysterious. The moment you become fully understood, you become controllable. Think about the most powerful people you know personally or have observed. Politicians, CEOs, influential figures. Notice how rarely they explain their personal decisions. They might explain policies or business strategies to stakeholders, but their personal choices? Rarely. Why did you choose this advisor? I trust their judgment. That's it. No breakdown of their vetting process, no justification of their criteria, just a statement of fact. Fifth, and this is subtle but crucial, explanation trains people to question you. If every time someone asks why, you provide a detailed answer, you're teaching them that questioning you yields results. you're reinforcing the behavior. They'll keep doing it. But if questioning you yields nothing but a boundary, they'll eventually stop. Not out of fear, but out of learned efficiency. They'll realize that asking you to justify yourself is a waste of everyone's time. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. As emperor, he was surrounded by people who wanted access to his decision-making process. Senators wanted to know why he chose certain generals. Advisors wanted to know why he prioritized certain campaigns. Even his own family wanted to understand his personal choices. And Marcus developed a simple practice. He would acknowledge their curiosity, but rarely satisfy it. "I've weighed all considerations" was often his complete answer. And then he would move on. No debate, no discussion, just a statement of completion. The Roman Senate eventually learned that questioning Marcus Aurelius was acceptable. He wasn't a dictator who punished questions, but that answers weren't guaranteed. His inner world remained his own. And this made him more respected, not less. Because everyone understood, this was a man who answered to his own conscience first, and to others only when strategically necessary. Machiavelli observed that Cesare Borgia would often respond to criticism or questions with complete silence. Not defensiveness, not anger, just calm, unbroken silence. And that silence did something explanation never could. It forced people to create their own answers. And human psychology being what it is, they almost always created answers that made Cesare more powerful, more calculating, more dangerous than he actually was. Silence creates mystery, and mystery creates authority. When someone asks, "Why did you do that?" and you don't answer, their mind starts racing. Maybe they have a reason I'm too stupid to understand. Maybe this is part of a larger strategy I can't see. Maybe they don't think I'm important enough to know. All three of those thoughts increase your perceived status, and you didn't have to say a word. Compare that to explanation. Well, I did it because of X, Y, and Z. Now you've given them something to criticize, something to poke holes in, something to disagree with. You've given them power. Sun Tzu wrote in The Art of War, "Let your plans be dark and impenetrable as night, and when you move, fall like a thunderbolt." He wasn't talking about military strategy alone. He was talking about life. Explanation makes your plans transparent. Silence keeps them dark, and darkness is terrifying. Here's the practical reality. When you stop explaining yourself, one of two things happens. Either people respect the boundary and start treating you as an authority, or they reveal themselves as people who never respected you in the first place and were only interested in controlling you. Both outcomes are useful. One elevates you. The other shows you who to cut off. Let me tell you about a specific historical example that demonstrates this perfectly. In 1502, Cesare Borgia faced a conspiracy. Several of his own commanders were plotting against him. They expected him to call a meeting, explain himself, justify his leadership, maybe make concessions. Instead, Borgia invited them to the city of Senigallia under the pretense of reconciliation. When they arrived, he had them arrested. Within hours, 2 were executed. He never explained why to anyone. No trial, no public justification, no defense of his actions. The other conspirators who hadn't attended the meeting, they fled, not because Borgia threatened them, but because his silence was more terrifying than any threat. What was he thinking? What was he planning next? Who else was on his list? The silence created paranoia that spread like wildfire. And Machiavelli, observing all of this, wrote, "Cesare Borgia was considered cruel. Nonetheless, his cruelty restored the Romagna, united it, and brought it peace and loyalty." The cruelty wasn't the point. The silence around the cruelty was the weapon. Now let's contrast this with rulers who explain too much. King Louis XIV of France constantly justified his actions to his nobles. He would hold councils where he'd break down his reasoning, seek consensus, explain his strategic thinking. And what happened? His nobles learned to manipulate him. They knew his decision-making process. They knew his weaknesses, his priorities, his fears. They could predict him, and they used that predictability to undermine him repeatedly. Machiavelli watched this happen and wrote, "The prince who lets himself be known by his enemies makes enemies of his friends." Here's how to apply strategic silence in modern contexts. Let's say you're in a relationship and you've decided to spend less time with certain friends who drain your energy. Your partner asks, "Why don't you want to hang out with them anymore?" You might explain, "Well, they're always negative, and I feel exhausted after seeing them, and I think they're a bad influence on my mindset, and..." Stop. New you says, "I've decided to be more selective with my time and energy." That's it. If they push, "But why? They're nice people." You hold the boundary. "I'm sure they are, and I've made my choice about how I spend my time." Notice what you didn't do. You didn't trash talk the friends. You didn't provide ammunition. You didn't open yourself to counter-arguments like, "But maybe you're being too sensitive," or "Maybe you should give them another chance." You stated your decision as a fact, not as a debate topic. This is strategic silence. You're not being rude. You're being sovereign. Another example. At work, you decide not to attend optional evening networking events anymore. Your manager mentions it. "I noticed you haven't been coming to the Thursday mixers." Explanation-based response. "Oh, well, I've been really tired lately, and my partner's been wanting me home more, and honestly, I don't find them that valuable, and..." You've now given your manager multiple pressure points. They can say, "Well, we all get tired, but networking is important for career growth," or "Maybe your partner should be more understanding of your career needs." Strategic silence response. "I've reevaluated my priorities and decided those evenings are better spent elsewhere." If they push, "But these events are valuable for visibility," you respond, "I appreciate the perspective. I'm comfortable with my decision." Conversation over. You've communicated that this isn't up for discussion, not through aggression, but through certainty. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who was born a slave, mastered this practice. His master would sometimes ask him to justify his philosophical studies. "Why do you waste time thinking about virtue when you could be working?" Epictetus could have explained the value of philosophy, tried to convince his master of its worth, sought approval. Instead, he would often say, "A man must occupy himself with something," and nothing more. The non-answer was the answer. It communicated, "I don't need you to understand my inner world. I'm not seeking your permission to develop myself." And here's what's remarkable. That very silence contributed to Epictetus eventually gaining his freedom. His master couldn't control what he couldn't understand. And a slave, who could not be controlled through conventional means, became less useful as a slave and more interesting as a person. Silence was part of his liberation strategy. The psychological principle here is called the information gap. When you don't provide information that someone expects, their brain goes into overdrive trying to fill the gap. And in filling that gap, they usually attribute more intelligence, more strategy, more power to you than you might actually possess. Silence leverages their own imagination against them. You become as powerful as they fear you might be. Now, Machiavelli wasn't a fool. He knew that blanket rules don't work in complex situations. He knew there are times when explanation serves you, and times when it destroys you. Here's the framework. Explain when the person has legitimate authority over you and your explanation serves a strategic purpose. If your boss asks why you made a business decision, explanation might be necessary. Not because you owe them validation, but because you're managing their perception strategically. You're not defending yourself. You're shaping their understanding to serve your goals. If a client questions your process, explanation can build trust, but only if you're framing it as education, not justification. Here's why this approach works, is different from, "I promise I'm doing the right thing," please believe me. Do you feel the difference? One is authority explaining methodology to increase buy-in. The other is insecurity begging for approval. Never explain when. Someone has no authority over you and is simply testing boundaries. The question comes from jealousy, resentment, or the desire to see you justify yourself. You're being asked to defend a decision you have every right to make. The person asking has already decided you're wrong and is only fishing for ammunition. Your relationship with this person is based on them not understanding you. That last one is critical. Some relationships only work because there's mystery. Your parents don't need to understand every decision you make as an adult. Your friends don't need a full explanation of your career moves. Your partner doesn't need a breakdown of every choice. Sometimes, "I've decided this is best" is the complete answer. And if they can't accept that, they're not respecting your autonomy. They're trying to control it. Machiavelli wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." I'd add, "It is better to be mysterious than understood, if you cannot be both." Because understanding can breed contempt, but mystery breeds respect. Let's get specific with scenarios. Scenario 1. Your mother calls and asks why you're not coming home for a holiday. You could explain. List your reasons, justify your choice, try to make her understand. Or you could say, "I've decided to spend this holiday differently this year. I know it's disappointing and I love you, but this is what I'm doing." She might be upset. That's okay. Her feelings aren't your responsibility to manage through explanation. Her feelings are hers to process. Scenario 2. A friend questions why you're dating someone they don't approve of. Explanation response. I know they seem whatever criticism, but actually they're really positive quality, and we have shared interest, and I think justification. You're now defending your relationship to someone who has zero stake in it. Strategic silence response. I'm happy with my choice. If they push, "But don't you think?" you respond, "I appreciate your concern. My relationship is my domain." Boundary established. Friendship preserved if they respect it, or revealed as conditional if they don't. Scenario 3. At work, you've declined a project that would require weekend work. Your colleague says, "I don't understand why you wouldn't take this opportunity." You could explain your work-life balance philosophy, your personal commitments, your belief that sustainable pace beats burnout. Or you could say, "It doesn't align with my current priorities." That's it. If they press, "But this could be great for your career," you respond, "I've weighed the factors and I'm comfortable with my decision." You've just communicated, "I don't owe you access to my decision-making calculus." Scenario 4. You've started a new diet or fitness regimen and someone mocks it. Why are you doing that fad diet? That's not going to work. Explanation response gets you into a debate about nutrition science where neither of you is an expert. Strategic silence. It's working for me. That's complete. They might continue. But studies show. You respond, "I'm seeing the results I want." Conversation over. You haven't engaged in the debate they wanted. You've simply stated your reality. Now here's the nuance Machiavelli understood. With people who have legitimate authority over you, your boss, a client, a professor, you don't give explanation out of weakness. You give selective information as a strategic tool. When your boss asks about a project decision, you're not justifying yourself to them. You're educating them on your methodology so they can effectively lead. That's different. The frame is different. You're not below them begging for approval. You're alongside them providing information they need to do their job. Machiavelli advised princes to explain things to their close advisors, not to seek approval, but to ensure alignment. A general doesn't explain his strategy to foot soldiers, but he does brief his lieutenants. Why? Because their effectiveness depends on understanding the mission. That's strategic communication, not insecure explanation. Here's the litmus test. After you explain something, Do you feel empowered or depleted? If you feel empowered, like you've just educated someone or aligned them with your vision, that was strategic communication. If you feel depleted, like you've just defended yourself against an attack, that was insecure explanation. Pay attention to that feeling. It's telling you which category the interaction fell into. Marcus Aurelius had a practice for this. Before responding to any question, he would pause and ask himself, does answering this serve virtue? Does it serve my purpose? Or does it serve their need to control me? If the answer was the first two, he'd answer. If it was the third, he'd deflect or stay silent. This wasn't rudeness. It was psychological boundaries enforced through strategic silence. Silence is powerful, but sometimes you need words that don't explain. Here's what Machiavelli would say instead of explanations. Instead of explaining your reasoning, I've considered all factors and made my decision. This communicates, I thought about this. My decision is final. Your input is closed. Instead of defending your choice, this is the direction I'm moving. This communicates, I'm not asking for permission. I'm informing you of reality. Instead of justifying your actions, I'm comfortable with my decision. This communicates, your approval is unnecessary. My internal compass is sufficient. Instead of apologizing for a decision you stand by, I understand you see it differently. This communicates, I acknowledge your perspective without adopting it or apologizing for not adopting it. When someone pushes for explanation, I appreciate your curiosity, but I'm not going to break down my decision-making process. This communicates, I see what you're doing, and it won't work. Boundary established. Notice what all of these have in common. They're statements, not arguments. They don't invite debate. They don't offer openings for criticism. They simply assert reality. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly. When senators questioned his decisions, he would often respond with silence or a single sentence that shut down further questioning, not through aggression, but through absolute certainty. The language of authority isn't loud. It's not defensive. It's not desperate. It's calm, final, and unshakable. Let me give you some more sophisticated responses for different situations. When someone says, I just think you should reconsider, you can respond, I appreciate that you've thought about this. I'm proceeding as planned. Notice what you didn't say, but I have good reasons. Or, let me explain why I don't need to reconsider. You simply acknowledged their input and restated your position. The conversation has nowhere to go from there except them accepting it or revealing themselves as disrespectful of your boundaries. When someone says, can you explain why you did that? You can respond, I could, but I don't think it would change anything for either of us. I'm at peace with my choice. This is brilliant because you're not saying no directly, which can trigger arguments. You're saying explanation would be pointless. You've killed their curiosity not by refusing to feed it, but by making it seem like feeding it would be a waste of time. When someone says, I don't understand your decision, you can respond, that's okay, you don't need to. This is power. You're granting them permission to not understand. You're releasing them from the burden of comprehension, and in doing so, you're establishing that their understanding was never a requirement for your action. When someone says, don't you think you should? You can respond, I've given it the thought it deserves. Notice the phrasing. You're not saying, yes, I've thought about it in a defensive way. You're saying you've allocated the appropriate mental resources. The implication, further discussion would be overthinking, not due diligence. When someone says, everyone thinks you're making a mistake, you can respond, everyone is entitled to their opinion. The phrase is common, but the delivery matters. Say it calmly, without sarcasm, without defensiveness. You're simply stating a fact. Other people can think what they want. Their thoughts don't govern your actions. When someone says, you owe me an explanation, this is the test. This is where most people cave. Because the person has explicitly stated that explanation is your obligation. Here's the response. I understand you'd like one. I'm not providing one. Direct, clear, unshakable. If they escalate, that's so disrespectful. You respond, I'm sorry you feel that way. My decision stands. You've acknowledged their feelings without accepting responsibility for them or changing your position. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, had a beautiful practice for this. When people demanded explanations for his philosophical choices or his personal life, he would often say, I'm accountable to virtue, not to public opinion. One sentence. Complete. It communicated his entire framework. He had an internal standard, and external judgment was irrelevant. People couldn't argue with it because he wasn't arguing. He was stating his philosophy. Here's a modern version. I'm accountable to my values, not to others' expectations. You can use this when someone tries to shame you into explaining yourself. They might say, but what will people think? You respond, I'm accountable to my values, not to others' expectations. The conversation ends because you've just told them that their entire argument, what others think, has no bearing on your decision-making. Another powerful phrase, I don't need to justify my boundaries. Use this when someone acts like your boundary is an attack on them. Why won't you come to family dinners anymore? I don't need to justify my boundaries. I've set them for my well-being. They might say, but we're family. You respond, I understand, and my boundary stands. You're not being cruel, you're being clear. One more. This isn't a negotiation. Use this when someone treats your stated decision as an opening offer. So if I do X, will you reconsider Y? This isn't a negotiation, this is my decision. It's firm without being angry. It's final without being dramatic. The master practitioners of this, Machiavelli's exemplars, all had something in common: economy of language. They didn't use 10 words when 3 would do. They didn't over-explain their non-explanations. They stated their position once, clearly, and then they stopped talking. Silence after a boundary statement is powerful because it doesn't give the other person anything to grab onto. If you keep talking after setting a boundary, you're giving them more material to work with. State it. Stop. Let the silence do its work. Cesare Borgia was famous for this. Historical accounts describe meetings where he would make a decision, state it in one sentence, and then stare at the person until they left. No. Does that make sense? No. Do you understand? No. Is that okay with you? Just the statement and the stare. And people learned when Borgia states something, the conversation is over. You don't need to stare people down. But you do need to resist the urge to fill silence with more words after you've set a boundary. That urge, to keep talking, to soften it, to make them feel better, that's your people-pleasing instinct trying to regain control. Resist it. State your position. Stop. Let them sit with it. When you stop explaining yourself, something remarkable happens. People start explaining themselves to you. The power dynamic flips. Suddenly, they're the ones seeking your approval. They're the ones justifying their opinions. They're the ones feeling like they need to convince you. Why? Because you've established yourself as the authority, and people instinctively explain themselves to authority. I've watched this happen in business, relationships, family dynamics, everywhere. The person who stops explaining becomes the center of gravity in the room. Everyone else orbits around them. But here's what you need to understand. This transition is uncomfortable. When you first stop explaining yourself, people will push back. They'll call you arrogant. They'll say you're being difficult. They'll accuse you of not caring. This is the test. They're testing whether you'll cave and go back to explaining. If you do, you've confirmed that their opinion matters more than your autonomy. If you don't, you've confirmed that you can't be controlled. Machiavelli wrote, "He who becomes a prince through the favor of the people should keep them friendly, which will be easy because they only ask not to be oppressed. But he who becomes a prince against the will of the people must keep them in fear." Applied here, If your authority comes from others' approval, you're always at their mercy. But if your authority comes from your own certainty, you're untouchable. The first few times you refuse to explain, it will feel wrong. You've been conditioned your entire life to justify yourself. Breaking that conditioning feels like rebellion. Good. It should. You're rebelling against a system that kept you weak. Let me walk you through what the transformation actually looks like in real time. Week 1. You start implementing non-explanation. You use the phrases. You hold boundaries. And people are shocked. What's gotten into you? They'll ask. This is them testing whether this is a permanent change or a phase. Your response, I've decided to be more intentional about what I share and with whom. That's it. No apology for the change. No reassurance that you're still the same person. Just a statement of new reality. Week 2. Some people will escalate. They'll get angry. You've changed, and not in a good way. This is crucial. They're trying to shame you back into compliance. The old you would panic and over-explain, No, I'm still me. I'm just trying to set healthier boundaries. I still care about you. Stop. The new you says, I'm growing. I understand if that's uncomfortable for you. You've just flipped it. Their discomfort is their problem, not yours to solve through explanation. Week 3. You'll notice something interesting. The people who truly respect you will adapt. They'll stop asking for explanations because they realize you won't provide them. And strangely, your relationships with these people will deepen. Why? Because now, when you do share something, they know it's because you want to, not because you felt obligated to. Your words carry more weight because they're voluntary, not extracted. Week 4. The people who can't adapt will start pulling away. This will hurt. These are often people you've known for years. Family members, old friends. But here's what Machiavelli would tell you. They're not pulling away because you changed. They're pulling away because they can't control you anymore, and a relationship based on control is not a relationship. It's a power imbalance that was always going to collapse eventually. By month 2 or 3, you'll notice a complete shift in how people interact with you. New people you meet will simply accept that you're not an over-explainer. It's just part of your personality to them. They never knew the old you, so they don't expect the old behavior. And established relationships have either adapted or ended. What remains are relationships based on mutual respect, not on you constantly justifying your existence. Here's a specific example from my own observation of this pattern. I watched a friend implement this in his family dynamics. He was the youngest of 4 siblings, and his entire life, he'd been the one who had to explain every decision to his parents and older siblings. Why he chose his major, why he took a certain job, why he was dating who he was dating. Everything required their approval. At age 28, he stopped. Just stopped. His mother asked why he wasn't coming home for Christmas. Instead of his usual 10-minute explanation of work commitments and travel costs and other plans, he said, I'm spending Christmas with my girlfriend's family this year. His mother pressed, But why? Don't you want to be with us? He responded, I'll miss you, and I'm still spending Christmas with her family. I'll visit in January. And then he didn't elaborate further. His mother was upset. His siblings called him selfish. For about 2 months there was tension. But then something shifted. His family started treating him differently. They stopped expecting detailed explanations for every choice. They started asking about his life in a genuinely curious way, not an interrogative way. Why? Because he'd established that he was the authority in his own life. He wasn't 14 anymore, explaining why he wanted to go to a friend's house. He was 28, informing them of his plans. By the next year, the whole dynamic had changed. His siblings even started joking about it. Don't bother asking him why, he never explains anymore. But it was said with respect, not resentment. They'd learned that he was someone with firm boundaries, and that made them respect him more, not less. Another example. A colleague implemented this at work. She was constantly asked to justify her design decisions to people who had no design expertise. Every meeting turned into her explaining why she chose certain colors, certain layouts, certain user flows. She felt like she was always defending herself. Then she stopped. When asked, "Why did you make it blue?" she started responding, "Blue serves the design goals for this project." If pressed, "But can you explain why blue specifically?" she'd respond, "I've optimized for user engagement based on the design principles we established. I'm confident in the choice." First month, resistance. People were annoyed that she wouldn't break down every micro decision. Second month, adaptation. People realized that arguing with her design choices was pointless because she simply wouldn't engage in the debate. Third month, transformation. People started trusting her expertise more. Why? Because her certainty signaled competence. If she was willing to stake her reputation on decisions without needing group consensus, she must know what she's doing. Within 6 months, she was promoted. Not despite her refusal to over-explain, but partially because of it. Leadership saw someone who had authority over her domain. She didn't ask permission for every choice. She made informed decisions and stood by them. That's what leaders do. This is what Machiavelli observed with Cesare Borgia. When Borgia first stopped explaining his military strategies to his commanders, there was confusion and resentment. Why won't he share his reasoning? But over time, those commanders who stayed with him developed absolute trust. They learned that Borgia's unexplained decisions had a pattern of working out. His silence wasn't arrogance, it was confidence, and that confidence became contagious. Here's what most people miss about this transformation. It's not about becoming cold or uncaring. Marcus Aurelius was one of the most compassionate emperors in Roman history. He cared deeply about his people, but he understood the difference between caring about people and being controlled by their need for explanation. You can love someone and still refuse to justify every decision to them. Epictetus taught, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. This is the price of autonomy." Some people will think you're arrogant for not explaining. Some will think you're cold for holding boundaries. Let them. Their misunderstanding is not your emergency. Your job is not to manage their perception of you. Your job is to live according to your own principles. Here's what I want you to do this week. Identify one relationship where you constantly explain yourself. Maybe it's a parent who questions every decision. Maybe it's a friend who makes you justify your choices. Maybe it's a romantic partner who demands explanations for your boundaries. Choose one. The next time they ask, "Why?" use one of the phrases from this video. "I've considered my options and made my decision. I'm comfortable with my choice. This is the direction I'm moving." And then, this is crucial. Stop talking. Don't elaborate. Don't soften it. Don't fill the silence with nervous words. Just stop. Watch what happens. Watch their reaction. More importantly, watch how you feel. You'll probably feel uncomfortable at first. That's your conditioning fighting back. Your brain is screaming, "Explain yourself. They're upset. Fix it." Ignore that voice. Sit with the discomfort. Let them sit with the boundary. One of two things will happen. Either they'll respect the boundary and your relationship will evolve to a healthier dynamic, or they'll push harder, get angry, and reveal that they were never interested in respecting your autonomy. Both outcomes are valuable. One improves your life, the other shows you who doesn't belong in it. Machiavelli wrote, "A prince must learn to be not good." He didn't mean immoral. He meant not good by everyone else's definition of good. Not good by the standards of people who want you to be controllable, predictable, and easy to manipulate. You must learn to be not good by those standards. Being good often means being pliable. Being nice often means being weak. Being understanding often means being boundaryless. Machiavelli saw that truly good leaders, the ones who protected their people, who built lasting institutions, who made hard decisions, were often called cruel, harsh, or heartless by those who didn't understand leadership. The same applies to your personal life. When you stop explaining yourself, some people will call you selfish. Let them. You're not selfish, you're self-possessed. There's a difference. Selfish means taking from others. Self-possessed means refusing to give away what isn't theirs to take. Your decision-making process isn't theirs to take. Your time explaining yourself isn't theirs to take. Your mental energy justifying your choices isn't theirs to take. And here's the beautiful paradox that Machiavelli understood. When you stop trying to make everyone understand you, the people who matter will understand you better. Because what they'll understand is that you're someone with firm boundaries, someone with inner certainty, someone who doesn't need external validation to know they're on the right path. And those qualities, boundaries, certainty, independence, those are deeply attractive to high-quality people. Low-quality people are attracted to weakness because weak people are easy to control. High-quality people are attracted to strength because strong people are reliable partners, not projects. When you stop explaining yourself, you'll lose low-quality relationships and attract high-quality ones. That's not a side effect. That's the point. Machiavelli's secret to untouchable authority wasn't complexity. It was this: act with certainty. Explain with scarcity. Answer to no one. Every day, practice these 3 principles. Morning. Before any interaction, remind yourself, I am the authority in my own life. My decisions are mine to make. Other people's understanding is optional. Say this out loud if you need to. Let it sink into your subconscious. You're reprogramming years of conditioning that taught you to seek approval for every choice. During the day, when someone asks for explanation, pause. This is critical. The pause. Don't react immediately. Take a breath. In that breath, ask yourself, does this person have legitimate authority over me in this situation, or are they testing my boundaries? Then respond accordingly. If they have legitimate authority and the explanation serves a strategic purpose, educate them. If they're testing boundaries, hold firm. Evening. Review your day. Where did you explain unnecessarily? Write it down. Not to beat yourself up, but to recognize the pattern. Where did you hold your ground? Write that down too. Celebrate it. Where did silence serve you? Where did explanation weaken you? This daily audit is how you rewire your behavior. You can't change what you don't track. This isn't about becoming cold or uncaring. The Stoics cared deeply. Marcus Aurelius loved Rome. Epictetus loved wisdom. Seneca loved his friends. But they refused to let caring become people-pleasing. They refused to let love become submission. You can care about people without explaining every decision to them. You can love someone without justifying your existence to them. The people who truly respect you won't demand explanations. They'll trust your judgment. They'll give you the space to be autonomous. They'll ask questions out of genuine curiosity, not interrogation, and you'll feel the difference. A genuine question feels like interest. An interrogation feels like a test. Pay attention to that feeling. It will tell you who deserves your explanations and who deserves your boundaries. The people who demand constant explanations were never going to respect you anyway. They were always going to find something wrong with your reasoning. Because the explanation was never the point, control was. They want to approve or disapprove of your choices. That puts them in the position of authority over you. Don't give them that position. Here's your 30-day challenge. For the next month, track every time someone asks you why. Before you answer, categorize it. Is this person genuinely curious or trying to control me? Do they have legitimate authority here or are they overstepping? Will explaining serve my goals or just satisfy their need to approve of me? Then respond based on your analysis, not your conditioning. You'll be shocked how many why questions are actually power plays disguised as curiosity. And you'll be shocked how good it feels to refuse to play that game. Machiavelli observed power for 15 years of active political life and another 15 years of studying history. One pattern emerged. The rulers who explained fell. The rulers who simply acted endured. Explanation is the language of the weak seeking permission. Silence is the language of the strong asserting reality. Cesare Borgia didn't explain his cruelty, and he was feared. Marcus Aurelius didn't justify his decisions, and he was respected. Machiavelli himself didn't apologize for the prince, and it's still studied 500 years later. Authority doesn't come from having the right answers. It comes from not needing others to validate those answers. You will make decisions that others don't understand. Good. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. Let them create their own narratives about your choices. Their confusion is your mystique. Their questions are your opportunity to establish boundaries. Their demands for explanation are your chance to demonstrate that you answer to yourself first. Never explain yourself. Not to people who haven't earned that level of access. Not to people who are testing your resolve. Not to people who wouldn't accept your explanation anyway. Your decisions are yours. Your reasons are yours. Your authority is yours. The moment you start giving it away through explanation, you've already lost. Machiavelli knew this. Marcus Aurelius lived this. Cesare Borgia weaponized this. And now you know it too. Here's the final test. Tomorrow, someone will ask you to explain yourself. Maybe it'll be about something small. Why you chose that restaurant, why you're wearing that outfit, why you said no to their invitation. Maybe it'll be something big. Why you're changing careers, why you're ending a relationship, why you're moving across the country. In that moment, you'll feel the pull. The old conditioning will kick in. Your mouth will want to start listing reasons. Your brain will start formulating justifications. You'll feel the pressure to make them understand. And in that moment, you'll have a choice. You can give in to the conditioning and explain. Or you can take a breath, use one of the phrases from this video, and hold your boundary. That choice, that single moment of choosing certainty over approval, that's where your transformation begins. Not in some distant future when you've read enough books or watched enough videos. Right there, tomorrow, in that conversation. That's your moment. Machiavelli wrote The Prince for Rulers, but the principles apply to anyone who wants to rule their own life. You are the prince of your existence. Your decisions are your decrees. Your boundaries are your borders, and you don't owe explanations to anyone who crosses them without permission. The question is, will you act like the authority in your own life? Or will you keep seeking permission from people who have no right to grant it? The choice, as always, is yours, and you don't owe anyone an explanation for what you choose. Stop explaining yourself. Start embodying authority. The people who matter will respect it. The people who don't will reveal themselves. Both outcomes serve you. See you in the next one.